The container ship had been at sea for nearly 3 weeks when the first missiles streaked across the sky above the Persian Gulf. Somewhere in the middle of the Indian Ocean, the captain received the order, "Do not proceed. Do not enter the Strait of Hormuz. Turn around. Find somewhere else to go. Somewhere safe. Somewhere that is not here." On board that vessel, packed into steel boxes stacked 6 high, were 300 tons of something that most people never think about. Something that has become more precious, in this moment, than oil. Something that, if it does not arrive in California within the next few weeks, will change what you pay for food, what is available on the shelves, and perhaps, what the future of American agriculture looks like. That something is urea, a simple compound, a white crystalline substance that contains nitrogen. It is the most widely used nitrogen fertilizer in the world, and without it, crops do not grow. Without it, yields collapse. Without it, the strawberries, the almonds, the corn, the wheat, the lettuce, the tomatoes, everything that comes out of California's $60 billion agricultural economy simply does not exist in the quantities that feed the nation. The ship was carrying a shipment worth $7 million. It was destined for Dubai's port of Jebel Ali, a trading hub that distributes goods across the Middle East. But the ship never made it. One vessel was diverted to the Netherlands. Another ended up in Algeria. The rest were scattered across the ocean, stranded, waiting, while the clock ticked down on the most critical moment in the agricultural calendar, spring planting. Before we go any further, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. This is the kind of story that affects everything about your life, from the cost of your groceries to the stability of the food supply chain. We are tracking it in real time, and we need you with us. Click subscribe now, and make sure you do not miss what happens next. Because what happens next may determine whether the food on your table stays affordable or becomes something only some can afford. Here is what is happening right now. In the waters of the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passage, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Under normal conditions, more than 100 vessels pass through it every day. About a quarter of the world's oil moves through that channel. Nearly a third of the global fertilizer trade moves through it as well. But since the war with Iran began 4 weeks ago, those numbers have collapsed. Daily transits have dropped from an average of 103 vessels to single digits. Single digits. A waterway that normally handles a third of the world's fertilizer is now effectively closed. What happens next may surprise many people who assume that the United States produces all of its own fertilizer. The truth is more complicated. While the vast majority of liquid nitrogen and ammonia is produced domestically, the United States imports about half of its urea, and that urea comes from the Middle East. It is produced in countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Iran itself, and it must pass through the Strait of Hormuz to reach global markets. Now, it is not passing through. It is sitting on ships anchored off the coast of Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates or diverted to ports in China, India, and Europe. Some shipments are being canceled before they even leave the dock. And the ones that are moving are doing so at a cost that has tripled to $7,500 per container. The price of urea has risen 30% in the past month. Between February 27 and March 6 alone, import prices jumped by that margin, and that is just the beginning. There is a man in Fresno County named Sal Para Jr. He runs a family farm that has been in his family for generations. He also serves as operations director for Bowles Farming Company, a sprawling operation of more than 10,000 acres in Merced County. Together, these two farms grow everything: nuts, corn, wheat, cotton, alfalfa, fruits, vegetables. They are the kind of operation that puts food on tables across America. And right now, Sal Para is scared. Not the kind of fear that comes from a bad harvest or a dry season. This is something different. This is the fear that the inputs he needs to grow food simply will not be there when he needs them. That the fertilizer he has relied on for decades may run out before the crops are in the ground. He is stockpiling. He has filled every storage tank he has with UAN-32, a liquid fertilizer that contains 3 forms of nitrogen, including liquid urea. He is storing as much as he can, trying to create a buffer against what is coming. But his family farm does not have much storage capacity. And once that fertilizer is gone, it is gone. The timing could not be worse. In California, the spring planting season is already underway. Warmer weather has pushed the schedule forward by about a month. The crops are ready. The ground is ready. But the fertilizer is stuck on the other side of the world, behind a blockade that shows no sign of lifting. This is not just a California problem. The Midwest is entering its planting season for corn, soybeans, and wheat. Those crops require massive quantities of nitrogen fertilizer. And farmers across the country are facing the same reality. The supply chain is breaking, and there is no clear timeline for when it will be fixed. There is a term that economists use when they talk about situations like this: price and purchase exposure. It means that farmers cannot wait. They cannot stockpile indefinitely. They cannot delay planting until the crisis passes. The crops do not wait. The seasons do not wait. The clock does not stop. Reports suggest that some farmers are already feeling the effects in ways that go beyond price. In Illinois, a farmer named John Yelly grows corn and soybeans. He told reporters that nitrogen prices have been rising so fast that his suppliers cannot even give him a quote. He calls and they tell him they do not know. They cannot tell him what it will cost because they do not know when it will arrive, or if it will arrive at all. Imagine trying to run a business where one of your essential inputs has no price, no delivery date, and no guarantee of availability. That is where American agriculture finds itself today. The White House has acknowledged the problem. The administration issued an emergency fuel waiver to allow continued sales of E15 gasoline, which is blended with ethanol made from corn. That helps in a limited way, but it does not solve the underlying issue. The American Farm Bureau Federation has sent a letter to President Trump with a specific request. Use the United States Navy to escort fertilizer shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. Provide safe passage. Break the blockade. Get the supply chain moving again. As of now, the White House has not committed to that course of action. And even if it did, the solution would not be immediate. The Port of Stockton, which handles 95% of the fertilizer that comes into California's Central Valley, is 30 days away from the Persian Gulf. Any ship that left today would take a month to arrive. Any decision made today would take weeks to produce results. In the meantime, the fertilizer that is still in the region is being diverted, sold at a premium, or simply held back by producers who are waiting to see how the conflict unfolds. The CEO of the Port of Stockton put it bluntly: the production is still there. The supply is still there. Getting it from there to here is where the difficulty lies. Some believe that the United States can simply ramp up domestic production to fill the gap. The USDA has announced more than $116 million in investments for domestic fertilizer production, including a $2.3 million grant to a California company that will process manure from dairy cows into composted fertilizer. But these are long-term solutions. They do not help the farmer who needs to plant in the next 2 weeks. Others point to the fact that the United States produces most of its own liquid nitrogen and ammonia. That is true, but urea is different. Urea is made from ammonia, which is made from natural gas. And while the natural gas can come from domestic sources, the price of natural gas has surged as well. In Asia, natural gas prices have roughly doubled since the conflict began. In Europe, the increases are similarly sharp because natural gas is the key input for all nitrogen-based fertilizers. The price of those fertilizers rises when gas prices rise. So even if the urea arrives, it will be more expensive. Even if the domestic supply chain holds, the cost of production will go up. There is no escape from the math. This is where the story takes a turn that many people do not see coming. The fertilizer crisis is not just about fertilizer. It is about the link between energy markets and food systems. When energy prices go up, fertilizer prices go up. When fertilizer prices go up, food prices go up. The chain is direct and it is short. There are no buffers left. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development has been tracking this closely. Their analysts warn that the disruption in the Strait of Hormuz is creating a shock that will ripple through global food systems. The region is responsible for 13% of global nitrogen exports and 9% of global phosphate exports. Those are not small numbers. Those are fractions that, when removed from the market, create gaps that cannot be easily filled, and the gaps are already appearing. In Ethiopia, which gets over 90% of its nitrogen fertilizer from the Gulf through Djibouti, the planting season is now. The fertilizer is not there. The supply route was strained even before the war began. Now it is broken. In India, farmers like Baldev Singh, a 55-year-old rice farmer in Punjab, are waiting and hoping. Smallholders, the bulk of the country's farmers, may not survive if the government cannot subsidize fertilizers when demand peaks in June. They are watching the news, watching the strait, watching their futures hang in the balance. In Germany, Dirk Peters runs a farm outside Berlin. He is an agricultural engineer, a man who understands the science of farming as well as the practice. He says that his crops need nitrogen now. The sooner the better. The nitrogen helps them get off to a good start, helps them establish themselves, helps them build up reserves for the harvest later in the summer. If the nitrogen does not come, the harvest will suffer. Some believe that this is different from previous fertilizer crises. After Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Food prices rose sharply, but that was largely because Ukraine and Russia are major grain exporters. The disruption was in the final product, not the inputs. This is different. This is a disruption in the critical inputs that farmers around the world need to grow anything at all. Veronica Nye is the chief economist at the Fertilizer Institute. She has been watching this crisis unfold from the beginning. She says that the situation is unlike anything the industry has experienced before. It is not occurring in a single market. It is not a problem that can be solved by shifting suppliers. It is a problem that affects every farmer everywhere because it affects the basic chemistry of agriculture. In California, the farmers are getting creative. Salpara is looking at alternative methodologies. He is exploring techniques to stretch supplies by more efficiently applying fertilizer. He is considering soil treatments that might reduce the amount of fertilizer he needs. He says he is going to get very creative with his fertilizer programs. But creativity has limits. There are only so many ways to make a plant grow. There are only so many substitutes for nitrogen. And every substitute comes with its own costs, its own learning curve, its own uncertainty. The farms that Para runs sell much of what they grow on contract. The prices are already set. That means the higher costs for diesel, for fertilizer, for everything else have to be absorbed. They cannot be passed along to the buyer. Not yet. Not until the contracts come up for renewal. And by then the damage may already be done. He worries about what comes next. He grows beautiful watermelons, carrots, tomatoes, but depending on what the price is, people may or may not buy them. If the costs of production go up, the prices at the market go up. And when prices go up, people buy less. Or they switch to something cheaper. Or they just do without. There is a broader context here that cannot be ignored. The war with Iran comes on top of years of stress for American farmers. Trade wars have locked them out of key markets. Tariffs have raised the cost of doing business. Natural disasters, droughts, freezes, floods have taken their toll. The American Farm Bureau Federation estimates that farmers nationwide have experienced losses of $90 billion since 2023. Faith Parham is an economist at the Farm Bureau. She puts it in stark terms. This is a matter of national security and food security. If farmers cannot stay in business, if the supply chain breaks, if the crops do not get planted, the consequences go far beyond the farm gate. This is about whether the country can feed itself. The irony is that the fertilizer crisis is happening at a moment when the administration has taken steps to help farmers. The $12 billion in emergency assistance approved in December included $1 billion for the specialty crops grown in California. The emergency fuel waiver for E15 helps. There is talk of dropping duties on fertilizer imports from countries like Morocco. But these measures are patchwork. They are responses to a crisis that is still unfolding. They do not solve the fundamental problem. The Strait of Hormuz is closed and the fertilizer is not moving. Some believe that the administration may have to go further. The Navy escort option is on the table. The Farm Bureau has asked for it directly. But sending warships into an active conflict zone is not a simple decision. It escalates the situation. It puts American service members at risk. It transforms a supply chain problem into a military operation. What happens next may depend on how long the conflict lasts. If the war winds down quickly, if the strait reopens, the damage may be contained. The shipments will move, the prices will stabilize, and the farmers will plant. But if the conflict drags on, if the blockade remains in place for weeks or months, the consequences will compound. The spring planting will be disrupted, the summer harvest will be reduced, the fall prices will rise, and the effects will not stop there. Because fertilizer is not just about this season, it is about the soil, it is about the long-term health of the land. Farmers who cannot afford to apply enough fertilizer this year may face reduced yields for years to come as soil nutrients are depleted and not replenished. There is a deeper question that hovers over all of this. What does it mean that a single waterway, 21 miles wide, can hold the global food supply hostage? What does it mean that the price of what you pay for bread, for milk, for vegetables, depends on the security situation in a country thousands of miles away? What does it mean that the farmers who feed the nation are at the mercy of forces they cannot control, cannot predict, cannot influence? Salpara is standing in his fields in Fresno County, looking at the ground that his family has worked for generations. The storage tanks are full, for now. The fertilizer is there, for now. But he knows that when it runs out, there may not be more. He knows that the ships are stuck, the strait is closed, the prices are rising. He knows that the crops do not wait. And somewhere, on a container ship, anchored off the coast of Fujairah, 300 tons of urea are sitting in steel boxes, waiting for permission to move. The ship was diverted from Dubai. It never made it through the strait. It is sitting there, day after day, while the planting season begins in California, while the farmers call their suppliers, while the prices climb and the uncertainty grows. The captain of that ship is waiting for orders. The shipping company is waiting for security guarantees. The insurance companies are waiting to see if they will cover the risk. The farmers are waiting for the fertilizer. The crops are waiting for the farmers. And somewhere in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, a narrow passage that has become the choke point for the world's food supply. What happens next is unclear. Some believe that the administration will act, that the Navy will escort the ships, that the strait will reopen. Some believe that the farmers will adapt, that they will find other sources, that they will stretch their supplies and make do. Some believe that the prices will stabilize, that the market will adjust, that the food will keep flowing. But others are not so sure. They look at the numbers. 95% of the fertilizer for California's Central Valley comes through the port of Stockton, 30 days from the Gulf. They look at the price, up 30% in a month and still climbing. They look at the ships, stuck, waiting, diverted. They look at the fields, ready for planting, waiting for the nutrients that may not come. And they wonder, what happens if the ships do not arrive? What happens if the fertilizer runs out before the crops are in the ground? What happens if the price goes so high that farmers cannot afford to plant? What happens to the food supply? What happens to the cost of groceries? What happens to the farmers who have already been through trade wars, tariffs, droughts and freezes, and are now facing a crisis that is not of their making? The answers are not yet written. The ships are still at sea. The strait is still closed. The farmers are still waiting. And somewhere, on a container ship in the Gulf of Oman, 300 tons of urea are sitting in steel boxes, waiting to see what happens next.